All right, hey everybody, welcome back. My name's Josh, so glad that you guys could be with us tonight. So tonight we are finishing the book of Philippians. Next week we begin a new series in Proverbs. Nick will be taking us through the first 2 weeks of that. But tonight we got Philippians 4, 10 through verses 23. We're talking about what it means to achieve contentment. Now, if you've been with us so far, you know that the book of Philippians, really, the tone seems almost in contradiction. It's like Chance the Rapper in a refugee camp. Those two things don't really seem to go together. Paul is joyful, excited, happy, but yet he's in prison. His circumstances suck, but yet he's happy and upbeat almost in the midst of them. And so, how is that possible? Tonight we're going to find out something about the real root of Paul's contentment and the real root of his peace. So we read starting in verse 10, he says, "I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content in whatever the circumstances." So some really important context here is that Paul had received this big financial gift from the Philippians. They had sent it through Epaphroditus, as we talked about a couple weeks ago. And this was cool because through this gift, Paul was able to have a house. He was under house arrest, but he was able to have a space from which he could receive guests and also write letters like the one to the Philippians that we are now reading. And so this gift was really meaningful. Now, a big windfall of cash is always great. I mean, I know a lot of you seniors are probably looking forward to receiving some graduation money, even though you're not going to have a party perhaps. And nothing wrong with that. Paul was happy about it too. He says, "I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that you renewed your concern for me." But then he goes on and says, "But I'm not saying this because I'm in need." At first glance, this could be Paul throwing it back in their face, being like, whatever, thanks for the money, who cares? But that's not really what he's saying. The point that Paul is making is that even though he's thankful, he doesn't want them to get it twisted. He doesn't want them to confuse that perhaps he needed this to be happy or to be secure. In reality, he didn't need the money, not for his basic sense of well-being. That's rooted in something else entirely. And so that's what he's going to go on to talk about. But when it comes to this idea of contentment, this is something which is a hot commodity. People want this. Every advertisement is selling it in some way or another. Before the quarantine happened, there were so many vacation commercials, and that's because airlines and cruise lines were not doing that well, and so they were putting out all these advertisements. And you can imagine scenes like this: cup of coffee, staring out at the ocean. That's peace. That's contentment. I won't lie, when I saw this picture, a single tear rolled down my cheek because last week I was supposed to be at the beach, but then, the apocalypse happened, so that didn't go down. But we all know what it's like to experience moments of serenity or moments of calm. And so sometimes people think of that as what contentment really is. But if you look back throughout human history, this is something which people have always been in pursuit of, long before cruises or beach vacations ever existed. And generally speaking, there have been two approaches that people have taken to this question. One is known as Stoicism. Now, that's a big word, and it's something that was really popular during Paul's day, but it's something that also shows up in bits and pieces even here in our culture today. The mantra of Stoicism is expect nothing, have nothing. The idea basically being that, the less attachments that I can have, the more controllable, the more peaceful my life will be, and I won't be dependent on anything outside of myself. And so the goal in Stoicism is self-sufficiency, control, and freedom from attachments. Now, you see Stoicism show up a lot of different places. Buddhism, ancient Greek philosophy. But one place where we see it today, which you may or may not be familiar with, is this new concept of minimalism, where people are trying to live these lives that are as simple as possible. Think Marie Kondo, but on steroids. Like nothing sparks joy except for a few basic things. And so this is something which people are into to some degree also today. And we need to give credit where credit's due because, a stoic lifestyle is a tough life. A stoic person who has little, who needs little, is somebody who in many ways is safe from certain kinds of disappointment in this life. And so there is something to this. A simple life, a less complicated life, that is a more happy life in many ways. However, there's some other problems here to be considered. For one thing, people who live this kind of lifestyle are often prone to a sense of pride or even superiority over those who don't or can't. You know, a monk in a monastery, they might be insulated in certain ways and have a peaceful life, but they're also in many ways aloof from the world, from some of the joys of the world, like cool experiences and relationships, or maybe even the real suffering and problems which many people experience. And so the Stoic approach to life can really be a self-protective approach to life, which is problematic. Now, on the complete other side of the spectrum from Stoicism, we have something called hedonism. Now, hedonism is a fancy word that refers to a pleasure-seeking life, a life that is after experiences and after things. While peace and contentment in Stoicism come from control and going without, in hedonism, it comes from acquiring, from possessing more. And so the mantra of hedonism is expect it all and have everything. And I would argue that this is far more common in our world today. The goal in hedonism is pleasurable experiences, comfortable relationships, having security through new possessions. The key is to keep those things coming at a steady clip. If I can keep having those things, then that's the path to happiness. That's the path to peace. And I think in our culture, this is probably best exemplified by modern celebrity culture, where you look at these people who can just have anything they want, anytime they want, and we think to ourselves, the closer I can get to that, the happier I'm going to be. Now, on the other hand, just like with Stoicism, we do need to recognize that hedonism has some good points. I mean, yeah, there's a ton of fun to have in the world. There are so many cool things to experience, pretty cool gadgets to have. And that's not all bad. It's not bad to want certain things for Christmas or to go, want to have sweet vacations and whatnot. I'm sad that I missed my beach trip, for instance. However, when hedonism becomes a lifestyle, when we begin to view pleasure-seeking as a pathway to contentment and peace, there's real problems. This can lead to an obsessive and even addictive way to live. People who have lived this way for some time can tell you that there really is a dark side. When you are after things and experiences, people often become accessories to those things and to those experiences. And so broken relationships ensue. Every experience, fun as it may be, doesn't last forever. It's incomplete, and then you need something else. And so hedonism also in many ways falls short of delivering real contentment for us. And so you can think of this as like a spectrum. You've got on one hand everything, you have on the other hand nothing. And you could look at that and think to yourself, well, maybe the key is just achieving balance between these things, like somewhere right in the middle. But I think there's a fundamental flaw with the whole system. The fundamental flaw here, the fatal flaw, is that it's all about the material. Not having or having, possessing or not possessing. What I experience, it's all horizontal, it's all on one line. What if true contentment doesn't come from your circumstances? What if it doesn't come from controlling what you have or don't have? What if it comes from something immaterial, something completely different? And that's what we're going to see with Paul here in Philippians chapter 4. He says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. So look at what Paul is saying. Paul is actually not a Stoic. I think when a lot of people think of, maybe like a radical Christian, you think of someone who's really austere, who doesn't have much, who lives kind of a boring life. But Paul's not saying, I'd rather be hungry. He's not saying, I'd rather not have. He's saying that I can be content in either circumstance. He's not a hedonist. He's not a Stoic. His security lies in something else entirely. He says, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. And so Paul's contentment is rooted in a relationship with his God. And this is something where if you go back in the Bible, you'll find that spiritual people of all ages have understood this. David wrote Psalm 23 in the midst of some pretty terrible life circumstances, and here's what he says: "The Lord is my shepherd, I have all that I need." He says, "My cup overflows." Yeah, I might be walking through the valley of the shadow of death, but my cup overflows, which is a way of saying I have everything that I need. I've got God. And so whether I'm a king in a palace or whether I'm on the run and living in a cave, I still have all the things that are most important to me, namely my relationship with the Lord. And so yeah, I can do all things through He who gives me strength. There's some real advantages to a life where contentment is rooted in a relationship with God. We've talked about this a number of times in the book of Philippians, but this is really an unbreakable sort of peace because it's not dependent on circumstances. It can't be taken from me. And for that reason, no matter what my life situation is, if the goal of my life is to know God, like we talked about in Philippians 3, and if my contentment comes through a relationship with God, then that means that every life circumstance can become a chance to learn and also a chance to grow. And that frees me ultimately then to live a life that's centered on love, because I don't have to worry about just controlling the factors of my life or trying to possess more, acquire the new thing that I need to feel content. Instead, I can give, because I'm happy whether I have a lot and I'm happy whether I don't have very much at all. My happiness was never contingent on either of those two things. Man, there is a radical sort of generosity that can emerge in the life of a person who really, really understands this. I wanted to read you guys a quote from the philosopher Aristides, who was a 2nd century thinker who lived in Athens. And he became a Christian and actually went on to give a presentation, a defense of the Christian faith to the Roman Emperor Hadrian. And here's what he says. When describing the early Christians, he says, if there is among them a man that is poor and needy, then they fast for 2 or 3 days that they may supply the needy with the necessary food. Can you imagine not just giving out of your excess, but going hungry so that someone else can eat? I mean, some of us know what it means to give to the degree that we have to go without something, but that is extreme. And I personally have never done this, but what I do know is that the kind of person who can make that kind of sacrifice is someone who can do it because they are content in any situation, just like Paul. And that's the kind of radical love that can really emerge when God is the source of your contentment and nothing else. Well, let's talk for a moment then about how we achieve this kind of contentment. How do we get there right now? A few different thoughts on this. One thing we need to do right away is we got to get our affections straight. Your affection is like what you want or what you desire. I don't know if you've ever been in a bad dating relationship before, where you and even your friends know this relationship is not good for you. Well, if you've been in that situation, then you know that the only real way out of it, because emotionally it's very confusing, but the only real way out of that relationship is to really wake up and realize, I just want the wrong thing. I keep going to this relationship thinking it's going to give me something, and it's not working. I want the wrong thing. I need to take my affections off of this, and I need to choose to desire something else. And that's what we need to do when it comes to our lives, to spiritual things. In Jeremiah chapter 2, God makes a similar argument to the nation of Israel. He says, you guys keep digging these wells, right? You keep digging wells, and these wells are broken. They don't have any water, but you keep trying to draw water out of them. And he says, if you just turned to your right, there would be me, the fountain of living water, waiting for you to meet your thirst. And so we need to get our affections right as well. And that might realize being like, I want the wrong thing. I need to want something better. Another thing we can do is learn to fix our hope for satisfaction daily on what comes from God. Many of us live pretty fragile lives. And what I mean by that is like you go out into the world each day and you start at 0, and if you get a bad look or a bad grade or something doesn't go your way, you go negative. You go negative 30, negative 40, whatever it might be. If you get compliments or likes, or maybe something does go your way, you're at a positive. And so we meet each day as such victims of our circumstances. Let me suggest something. We just finished this book of Philippians. Each day for the rest of this week, I challenge you to read through this book. Maybe throw in a psalm, like one of David's psalms too. Read this book, read a psalm for 5 minutes every morning. And then pray and thank God for the things that He's given you and the things that He's showing you. Just do that. 5 to 8 minutes every single day and see if it makes a difference in how you meet the circumstances which come your way. I'm willing to bet that it will. We can also note that small decisions of faith often add up to big ones. So this question of contentment, I think, becomes really important when, quite frankly, you're not content. When maybe something doesn't go your way, or when you're in the midst of pain. The question then, you reach a crossroads at that moment where you have to decide, will I trust God? Will I look to God for my contentment? Or will I just be discontent until I can change my circumstances? If you go the other way, you might get out of it. You might feel better a little bit down the road, but you will fail to learn the lesson of faith that you can be content no matter the situation, if you only would look to God. Well, for some of us who are here listening to this, everything that I've said might be kind of getting ahead of ourselves, because we first need to deal with the fundamental problem before we can talk about contentment. I wanted to read you this verse from Hebrews. It says, "Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, 'Never will I leave you and never will I forsake you.'" That's a powerful verse. But here's the key thing. He says, be content because God has said this to you. And so the question that you need to ask yourself is, how do I know that God has said this to me? Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. It's in the Bible, but how do I know that I'm included in that promise? The answer to that question is that God has made it possible for you to be absolutely certain that you are His child and therefore this promise applies to you. All you need to do, if you know you've never done it, is to open your heart to God right now and tell Him that you want Him to be your source of contentment, that you want Him to be your source of joy. And so admit that you need God. Ask Him to forgive you for the things that you've done wrong, and know that He is willing to give it to you, forgiveness and a relationship, if only you will ask. And from that moment forward, you can be confident that when God looks at you, what He is saying is, never will I leave you and never will I forsake you. And then you can learn to draw upon Him as the basis of your contentment. Well, that's all we have for this evening, but as usual, we do have some questions for you guys to think about and discuss in virtual discussion groups. The first one is this: read Philippians 4:14 through 20, so the rest of the passage, and ask the question, what do these verses teach about the relationship between contentment and generosity? Secondly, what does it look like to be a generous giver while still in high school? Good question. Not all of us have jobs, so then how are we supposed to be generous and giving people? And then thirdly and finally, if a life of pleasure-seeking fails to satisfy, then why is it so tempting to continue living this way? So think about those, talk about those, and I will see you guys in a couple weeks. Let me pray for us real quick. God, you are good. And one thing that's just been driven home in this book of Philippians is that your goodness is an unchanging fact regardless of circumstance. And we remember all the way back to chapter 1, where Paul said, for me, if I live, that's awesome, but if I die, that's gain, because I go to be with God. And then throughout it, the joy that he has, even though he's in prison, God, we pray that we could become strong like that in faith, so that we are able to handle each day and each circumstance, regardless of what comes, in stride, because we have a hope that's fixed in something different. I pray for that, God, and I also pray that as you change us to be more and more like you in this way, that people would be able to see you in each of our lives. Amen.